Hey there, and welcome back to the Affinity Insurance Podcast. Today, I am joined by insurance experts Alyssa Wilcox and Nicole Dean, and we're talking about all things business insurance trends. There's a lot of things happening in the world that we see kind of coming down the pipe the next 6 to 12 months. We want to make sure you understand so that you can make the most of your business insurance. So, first question I have, and I'm going to kick it off with Alyssa. There's a lot of trends happening in general right now. We're kind of seeing across the board around pricing, availability of insurance, underwriting. How do you think that business leaders, owners need to prepare from an insurance perspective to make sure they're covered the next year or so?
Luckily, the business insurance market isn't being impacted as greatly as like the homeowners market, but overall, we are just seeing prices increase. Reinsurance, which is like the companies that back our known insurance companies, they're seeing price increases, inflation's impacting that. And so overall rates are just on the rise. I think also carriers are being more cautious about the types of risk that they're willing to write. So they're just being more cautious, seeing increases in rates, and then, yeah, just being more selective about the type of businesses that they take on. So you can expect to see limited availability in the standard market, but there are carriers who don't pay into the sort of the state-backed solvency funds that are used for standard carriers. So there are non-standard carriers that do have higher risk appetite. So there's always a solution. It just might cost you more, I think, in the long run.
So, when we're looking at natural disasters and just climate related risk in general, that's probably been more prevalent the past couple of years than maybe ever before, from the LA wildfires to the Texas flash floods recently. We're just seeing a lot of these sorts of situations pop up. With that in mind, how are you consulting with your clients? How are you kind of coaching your clients to think about their coverage, especially with if they are in these areas, their rates can climb a lot, especially when this stuff happens. Like, what are you kind of telling your clients that are in these kind of spots?
It goes back to the core of what insurance is, and it's a transfer of risk. So the question is, are you willing to take the risk on yourself? Is the cost of insurance to balancing the cost versus the risk and the reward? So I think that it's important to remember that and to kind of evaluate where you're at in your business, and is the cost of insurance important? Like if you're a property owner and you were non-renewed because you're in a high fire zone, are you willing to potentially rebuild at your own cost versus paying for the coverage? So I think that evaluating that and also just looking at all of your options, looking at the non-standard carriers to see what their rates are, just so you can do a proper evaluation.
So consider getting creative really as part of it as well. It's not always thinking like, okay, I have to go this one path. So it's evaluating the risk, it's evaluating the balance for you, depending on how much value you have in the thing you're trying to insure, but also considering other options. And I feel like that's potentially where internet insurance really can be a big help to people, is because we're not carrier specific. So we can help you go out and look for all different kinds of options to make it a more creative solution if you are in some of these areas.
Absolutely, definitely.
And that's what I was going to interject as well, is that it's really important to work with a broker to help kind of navigate, make sure you are carrying the coverages that you need, and then maybe you can trim back on some of the stuff that's not necessary.
Another big trend we're seeing right now is cyber insurance. And that's really picked up the past several years in particular. But it seems like the past year or so, and it kind of seems to continue to grow in this way, it's more complex to actually get this coverage than it used to be. Why do you think that is? And how can owners navigate that to make sure they're getting this? So it's become a pretty critical, type of insurance.
I think the key with cyber insurance is that because it is so new, carriers are sort of learning as they go. And as they see trends develop, claim trends, especially, they're starting to better understand their risk exposures. And so the requirements are changing. So in terms of being a business owner and protecting your business when it comes to cyber, I think the key is like making sure you have proper firewalls and educating employees about phishing and doing those preventative things that will not only protect you, but like make you more desirable for a carrier to offer you cyber coverage. Knowing that you're trying to prevent it as much as you can, they'll be more willing to offer quotes. So it's just, again, that new frontier of insurance, really.
That's an interesting way that you put that because it might to the business owner or to the customer feel like it's getting harder to get this insurance. But really, it's not harder. It's just they're learning more what
Mhm.
actually needs to exist to be able to cover people. So now you're having to kind of like navigate that alongside the carrier to understand, like, yeah, maybe 5 years ago you could have gotten cyber insurance with like, I just want to give it to me. Like that's all it took. But now it's like, okay, now we know that we're having to we see claims all the time and nobody had a firewall. We don't want to have to keep paying out claims when you could have put a very simple practice in place that would have prevented this. You kind of have to understand it from both sides, and if you can understand it from both sides, then you can navigate it more for yourself and for your business.
Yeah, and I do think that, like, we have carriers that will quote cyber very easily and programs focused on small businesses. So it's not that there's a ton of roadblocks. It's just common sense things that we all need to do.
Contractors and gig workers obviously have become an essential part of our labor force. It's no longer just like this trend that I think people kind of thought it was something that was gonna be big for a little bit, and then people are gonna go back to a very traditional like W-2 employee sort of perspective. But it's actually grown enormously, and it's a huge part of the labor market now. Because of that, it's also become essential for businesses to run, but it does open people up to more risk. And we've talked about that a lot, Alyssa, in particular with 1099 contractors, what you need to have in place. But can you just give a quick kind of few steps that owners can take to protect themselves? Again, I know we've talked about it before, but I think it's worth repeating with how much this continues to grow.
I think that first and foremost, if you're working with a 1099 contractor or gig worker, ask for a certificate of insurance. That's a big part of what we do in servicing our clients is providing certs. We call them certs, but certificates of insurance, which just outlines that the coverage that you have in place. It's a good practice to request that your contractors list you as an additional insured. That way, the work that they do for your business, if they make a mistake and you're dragged into a claim, their insurance will cover you for the work that they do. So I think that's the bare minimum of what you should do. It should be part of the vetting process. Here in California, especially, there are strict labor laws protecting employees. And so if you were working with a gig worker or a 1099 contractor, you understand the labor laws and how that will apply to you. Because if you do work with a subcontractor that doesn't have their own insurance, you could be liable for paying for workers' comp coverage for them. So, that's where getting the proper certificates of insurance are important because that's proof that, hey, this is a legitimate business. They're indeed independent. Look, they have their own insurance, and I'm not responsible for their workers' comp. I'm not an employer, just covering all your bases.
Well, thank you all so much for your insights as always. And we hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Affinity Insurance Podcast. Be sure to tune in next month for another great episode breaking down what you need to know to protect your business and your life.